Emma had not ordered what she actually wanted at a restaurant in 4 years. She knew this precisely because she had thought about it precisely, in the way you think, about things you have been pushing aside long enough that they return with a specificity that surprises you. 4 years. It was not because she was indecisive. She was not indecisive. She knew immediately what she wanted when she looked at a menu. The clarity arrived within 30 seconds, sometimes before she had finished reading. It was because whoever she was eating with had a preference, and it was easier and smoother and more comfortable for everyone at the table if she simply agreed with that preference, if she suggested they share the thing they wanted rather than the thing she wanted, if she said that actually sounds great when it did not sound particularly great to her, but sounded fine enough to avoid the small friction of a different preference. She had become very good at fine enough. Emma was 30 years old, and she was, in the description of everyone who knew her, easy to be around. Low maintenance, flexible, a good listener, a person who never made things difficult. She had heard these descriptions her entire life and had received them as compliments, because they were offered as compliments and because she was 22 when she first started hearing them. And 22 is not old enough to understand what some compliments are actually describing. She was 30 now and she understood. Easy to be around meant makes no demands. Low maintenance meant suppresses her needs before they inconvenience you. Flexible meant will become whatever the situation requires of her. Good listener meant does the emotional labor of other people's needs while her own wait. She had not chosen these descriptions intentionally. Nobody chooses them. They accumulate, the way habits accumulate, in the gaps between small decisions that individually seem insignificant and collectively produce a personality that belongs more to other people's comfort than to your own truth. It had started with her mother, Rita, who was a woman of strong preferences and stronger feelings, who had needed Emma to be agreeable in the way that some parents need their children to not add to the weight they are already carrying. Emma had learned early that her mother's happiness was manageable if Emma made herself small enough. That conflict could be avoided. That smoothness was achievable. She had carried this skill out of her childhood and into every relationship she had subsequently formed. At work, she was the person who stayed late when asked, who took on the project no one else wanted, who said of course without checking whether of course was actually possible. Her colleague David, who was considerably less capable than Emma and considerably louder about his own preferences, was on track for a promotion that Emma's manager had mentioned Emma was also being considered for. She had not said anything when the manager mentioned it. Of course she hadn't. With her friends, she was the one who chose the restaurant everyone else wanted to go to, who watched the movie the group preferred, who said I'm easy when asked what she wanted and meant it as flexibility, but increasingly suspected it was something else. With the man she had dated for 2 years and then stopped dating, she had spent most of the relationship being whoever he found most comfortable to be around, which was a kind of exhausting performance that she had not recognized as a performance until after it ended, when she had felt, beneath the sadness, a strange, quiet relief that she could not fully explain. The relief of not having to manage someone else's comfort at the expense of her own. The relief of being in a room alone where she did not have to calibrate herself to anyone. She had not told anyone about the relief. It had not seemed like the right thing to say. The morning that something shifted was an ordinary Wednesday in February. She was in a meeting at work, the kind of meeting that exists to discuss what should be done, rather than to actually do anything. Her manager was presenting a plan. It was not a bad plan. It was not a good plan. It was a plan that would take a great deal of effort to produce a mediocre result when there was an obviously better approach that Emma had been thinking about for 3 weeks. She had not said anything about the better approach. She had been waiting for the right moment, for someone to ask, for the opening that would make it feel like an invitation rather than a challenge. The meeting ended. The plan was adopted. She walked back to her desk. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She stared at the screen, and then she did something she had not done in a long time. She asked herself quietly, without softening the question, why didn't you say anything? Not why didn't you get the timing right, not why didn't you find the right words, just why didn't you say the thing you knew? She sat with the answer. The answer was not what she would have told someone else it was. She would have told someone else it was about timing, about reading the room, about picking your battles. The honest answer was simpler and more uncomfortable. She had not said anything because saying something might make people uncomfortable, might create friction, might change how someone in the room felt about her, even slightly, even temporarily. She had held back a better idea to preserve the comfort of people who had not asked for her comfort. She had made herself small, again, in the way she had been making herself small for so long, that small had started to feel like her actual size. She thought about something her college professor had told her once, a woman who taught literature and wore her opinions like clothes, loudly and without apology, which Emma had found both admirable and slightly frightening when she was 20. Her professor had told her a story about chameleons, not scientifically accurate, she had said with a smile, but true in the way that stories are true. There was once a chameleon, the professor had said, who lived in a forest full of different creatures. The chameleon discovered early that he could change his color to match whatever he was near, and that this made him very popular. When he was with the green frogs, he was green. When he was among the brown bark, he was brown. When the bright birds came, he could become something close to their brightness. Every creature in the forest loved the chameleon because when they were with him, he reflected them. He seemed to understand them perfectly. He seemed to be like them, and the chameleon loved being loved, so he kept changing and changing and changing. Until one morning, sitting alone in the early light before any other creature arrived, he tried to remember what color he actually was. He could not. He had changed so many times, for so many creatures, for so long, that his original color had become unavailable to him. Not gone exactly, but buried under so many accommodations that he could no longer locate it. He had been so busy being what everyone needed that he had forgotten what he was. Emma had heard this story at 20 and thought it was about something else. At 30, sitting at her desk on a Wednesday in February, she understood what it was about. She was the chameleon, had been the chameleon for so long that the question of what Emma actually thought, actually wanted, actually believed had become genuinely difficult to answer. Not because she lacked thoughts and wants and beliefs, but because the habit of filtering them before they became inconvenient to anyone had become so automatic that she sometimes finished filtering before she had even fully formed the thought. She ate lunch alone that day, which she did not usually do. She ordered exactly what she wanted without consulting anyone. A small thing, embarrassingly small in the context of everything she had just understood about herself. But she tasted it differently. Not because the food was different, because the choice had not been filtered through anyone else's preference first. She started noticing it every day. The number of times she filtered before speaking. The number of times she asked what everyone else wanted before identifying what she wanted. The number of times she said "I'm easy" or "whatever works for you" or "that sounds great" when the honest version was different. She started small, smaller than she thought transformation would look. She started saying what she actually thought in low-stakes situations. A movie she genuinely did not want to watch. A restaurant she had a real preference about. An opinion in a conversation that did not threaten anything except the smoothness of complete agreement. It was uncomfortable, not dramatically, but in the small way of doing something that contradicts a long-established habit. And something surprised her. People did not react the way she had implicitly feared they would. When she said, "Actually, I'd rather try the other place," her friends said okay and they went to the other place. When she said, "I think the movie didn't quite work for me," the conversation continued without anyone withdrawing their warmth. When she told her friend Sarah something honest about what she was going through, instead of the fine she had been delivering for months, Sarah leaned forward and said, "Tell me more." which was the exact opposite of the withdrawal Emma had been protecting against. She had spent 4 years managing other people's comfort in advance of a discomfort that, when tested, did not arrive. She had been the chameleon, changing colors for creatures who had never asked her to. The work was not finished. She was 30 years old, and the habit of self-erasure was not going to dissolve in a week of small, honest moments. She still filtered sometimes. She still caught herself halfway through a softened version of her own opinion and had to decide whether to finish the sentence she had started or start the sentence she meant. More and more often she started the one she meant. She was still easy to be around, but she was easier to be around because she had decided to be, not because she had no other option. She was still a good listener, but she was also, for the first time in a long time, someone who expected to occasionally be listened to in return. She ordered what she wanted at dinner the following Friday, leaned back, let herself want it fully and without apology, tasted it the same way she had tasted the Wednesday lunch, like something chosen, not filtered, not smoothed, not offered in place of the real thing to make the evening easier for people who had not asked for the accommodation. Just chosen, by her, for herself. It tasted, she noticed, exactly like what she had wanted, which had always been the point. She had just spent 4 years forgetting that her wanting was allowed to be the point. It was. It had always been. The chameleon's original color was still there. It had just been waiting for her to sit still long enough to remember what it was.